Hi, it's been a while. It's been so long I forgot how to start the audio on Audacity. What the fuck? My mic is also like 1,000 miles away from me, so anyways, hi, it's Tootie Tootie. Long time no see. The reason why I'm making this video is because I watched Mother's Basement's video and realized he was talking about best anime, 2018 being the best year for anime ever, and that was just fucking ridiculous. The more ridiculous part is how relativistic his viewpoint is. His reasoning was basically there's something for everybody to watch, or there's something for everybody to like. That's not really a reason to justify it as the greatest year. Greatest kind of assumes that we're not going to argue over this entire, quality of being objective or whatever, but it argues the quality of the show as opposed to whether the show is, what's the word I'm looking for? Relatable or appealing to a certain crowd, right? Like, obviously, every show is going to have its audience, and there's always going to be something for everybody in every year. So it's just uber relativistic to just kind of go, oh yeah, this year has a bunch of shows that everybody can watch, and therefore it is the greatest year of anime ever. Because I could say that about 2017 and 16 and 15 and 14 and 13. And definitely 14 more than like almost any of those other years, because you had shows like Tokyo Ghoul and Akame Got Killed and a bunch of all that other garbage that was coming out. But anyways, what this ended up making me realize was I didn't finish a lot of shows this year, and I knew that going into this, but I was really curious to see how many shows I finished versus the ones that I started and did not finish. Most of those due to time constraints, and they're like the second category. On screen right now, you're going to see a chart of the shows I completed, the shows I didn't finish due to time constraints, and the shows I dropped. I wanted to go over this list, right? But I'm going to start with the drop shows because they're easier to get through. There's less of them compared to like the didn't finish, and I want to save the completed for last because there's not too much that like I kind of need to get to with them. So the first show I wanted to get to was Violet Evergarden. It's a heap of over-processed garbage. It's super boring. The directing is very uninteresting. The world building is very uninteresting, despite how pretty it looks. The characters are very uninteresting. It's really hard to kind of figure out what the hell the show is aiming for, right? Because you have this main character who's seemingly maybe not autistic, but seems to be a plot device for the sake of, or she seems to be the mediator, right? And by mediator, I just mean she's a plot device. That's essentially all she is. Her inability to perceive emotions and to perceive things is a way of getting people to recognize issues within themselves, or a way to make people or characters recognize issues, right? The problem is she has no character herself, and if it has to fulfill that role, then the characters that she's fulfilling it for it also need to be interesting, or the conflict needs to be interesting. Problem is none of the conflicts are interesting, right? Because none of the characters are interesting, so I don't care about the issues in which they're going under. Aside from that, the soundtrack is okay, and while the production quality is high, it's really over-processed or post-processed, and it's pretty, but sometimes it's like, it's pretty to the point where what's the best way to describe this? It's like how K-Project gets at some points, where K-Project feels really actually no, not K-Project, Handshakers. Handshakers is a really good comparison, where it's just way too many effects. And that's my basic thoughts on Violet Evergarden. It's really boring, it's very uninteresting, it's over post-processed, and that's about it. Death March Rhapsody is, see, here's the weird thing with this show, right? Going into this show, when I watched the first 3 episodes, it really felt as if it was bad, but it was bad intentionally, and there was some sort of creepy, mysterious vibe about it. Almost as if it was intentional. It turns out that going through like 2 more episodes, I realized, oh no, it's not intentional, it's just genuinely not good. And so I dropped the show. It suffers from a lot of like the basic issues that a lot of anime have of like isekai genre. The world is very uninteresting, and it's very bland and dull and generic, like video game-esque. Characters are very uninteresting, they're just self-inserts. The method in which they get transported is fucking stupid. This show, like, the guy, there's no such thing as kind of like being born in with just a special power. He just gets born in with like unlimited fucking VC, like it's 2K. And that's really about it. That's about all I have to say. Like, you know, selling off little slave girls is always great, but it's not enough to save the show, sadly. Also, it looks pretty fucking terrible. That's not necessarily too bad of an issue. That wouldn't necessarily be too bad of an issue, but if the show was decent, but it's not. I will say that the first episode at least had me interested from the standpoint of showing the guy working as a programmer and like I think he was working. Yeah, he was a game programmer. I thought that was all pretty interesting for like the first 12 minutes. Maybe that's just because I'm a CS major, so seeing like how CS works in Japan for like game companies was kind of interesting. But then they completely diverge from that, and then it becomes very uninteresting. If I had to give it a score, it's probably a 3. If I had to give Violet Evergarden a score on drop, it was a 4. And now we'll move on to the next one, which is A Place Further Than the Universe. A Place Further Than the Universe is the show that I started, got 3 episodes into, and went, this is the 6th of the year that everybody's gonna call a 9. Just like how Made in Abyss was like, Made in Abyss is like the 5 of the year that everybody called a 9. You know? It's that type of show where it looks pretty and there's things to salvage about it, but there's nothing that is really all that interesting or really all that compelling to warrant the score that it's been given, if that makes any sense, right? And maybe you're going to tell me I can't discern that from 3 episodes in, but I can discern from 3 episodes in that these characters were not any characters that I really wanted to learn more about. They seemed, it kind of seemed like one of those like cute girls doing cute things type of show, and maybe that ended up not being what it was, but from the small amount of drama I saw, the drama was not in any way compelling. I thought that the art direction's really nice. I think it actually had a pretty decent soundtrack from what I remember. The voice acting's pretty nice. From a presentation standpoint, it's pretty nice, but the issue is that if you're going to take me through a journey with these characters, then I have to be able to, like, care about the drama in which these characters undergo, and the show felt as if it was never going to get to a point where it never felt as if I was ever going to get to a point where I actually cared about these characters, and thus there was no way I was ever going to care about the drama in which the characters got into. I think it started off a little too slow for me. It didn't seem like it was really going to go anywhere. I don't think it ever really does go anywhere. I know they go to Antarctica or something like that, but that's about it. It's not bad. I didn't see anything in the first 3 episodes that I said was really bad. I just didn't see anything that was very intriguing, and so I just dropped it because I figured it'll probably be an above average show that gets overrated to hell, and that's what it ended up being. And maybe sometime I'll give it a rewatch again because everybody's giving it a 9, but if it's going to be the same way that I viewed Made in Abyss, where everybody's giving it 9s and 10s, I go to watch it and it's a fucking 5 because people want something that's kind of different, but doesn't stray far enough and doesn't have like, and it has too many problems, right? Like, or I'm sorry, I'm getting into Made in Abyss. Made in Abyss kind of has too many problems for me to go, yeah, this thing's a fucking masterpiece, despite it being a little different from everything that was coming out at the time. This show, though, is not necessarily very different from everything that's coming out at the time, is it? Like, there's stuff like Yamano Susume still coming out, and like season 3 of that came out. But this just wasn't very interesting, and that's why I ended up dropping it. That's all. Not a bad show. Probably would give it a 6. We'll move on, though. Tonkatsu Ramens is okay. Kind of. Like, if I had to give it a score, I'd probably go like 4.5 to 5. It's maybe a little below average. It doesn't look very good, but that's not really too much of the issue. I thought the character of the transgender guy, the cross-dresser guy was okay. He's a decent character, I guess. Not in the sense that he's interesting or his motivations are interesting, but in the sense that he's just entertaining. I thought the dynamic between the main character and that guy were pretty interesting. But other than that, nothing was really very entertaining. I like what it attempted to do with the city, Hakata or Hakata. I don't remember what the hell the name of it is. It's in the fucking title. But I like how they tried to personify the city, right? This is something that Durarara does and there's a couple of other shows that do it, but I'm not sure any show really does it better than Durarara, where the city in Durarara really does feel like its own character, as opposed to here, where it's not really too elaborated on. The city itself is more so just known as a hub for gangsters, as opposed to really taking on its own persona, and that's kind of something that I wasn't really a fan of. I liked what it was trying to do, or I liked what the attempt is supposed to be. It wasn't very well executed, though. In terms of, like, I don't know, mystery and thriller direction, it's intriguing to the point where I would watch, like, 3 episodes, but I'm not sure, or, well, I know, it wasn't intriguing for me enough to finish the rest of the series. And here's the thing, with a show like Banana Fish coming out, or that came out later the exact same year, that is just significantly better than, like, Hakata Tonkatsu Ramen, there's no reason for me to kind of go back and finish this. Everything that Banana Fish does is something, or everything Banana Fish is just better Hakata Tonkatsu Ramen, if that makes sense, right? So there's no reason for me to watch this show. If I was going to compare it to anything, I'd compare it to, like, a less interesting Durarara, I guess. And that's about all my thoughts on that. If I had to give it a score, like I said, probably around 4.5, 5, something like that. Not very impressive at all. Fate Last Encore is garbage. There are a couple of issues with animation within the first episode. That's not really too big of an issue if there's not too many issues with pacing and storyboarding's not necessary. Storyboarding was actually kind of interesting, but the art itself was very inconsistent. I don't even understand what the hell I was watching that first episode. It was pretty fucking terrible. I remember watching the first episode thinking first time around maybe it was like a 6. Rewatched it again and went, what the hell? This is like a 2. This is one of the worst things I've seen in a very long time. It's just kind of a mess of ideas. I didn't even get past the first episode. I dropped it after episode 1 because I was like, this is really not worth continuing. And if this was one of, like, the more premiere Fates, but like Ufotable, I'd probably just watch it all the way through despite it being something that I know is not going to be good or anything. But I'd watch it for the sake of, like, having some sort of historical value on it. But this is not something that was going to leave an impact regardless. Nobody talks about the damn show because it's not interesting. Nobody talks about the show because, unlike the Ufotable shows, they don't look good. So regardless, so there's no way to, like, justify, like, the issues with the show, right? There's no way to justify the pretentiousness, the bad pacing, the uninteresting characters, things of that sort. It's just not a good show for virtually every reason you could define a bad show by, right? It just meets all of the fucking criteria. It's a 2. I don't even feel like I really need to explain this, so we can just move on. Ameagari is one of those shows that I only dropped because I just wasn't really too interested in. There was nothing wrong with it. I thought the direction was actually okay. The intro's really nice. Characters are actually kind of interesting, maybe not the characters themselves. I do like the older gentleman. I'm not really sure if I care too much about the girl with the really cold eyes, but I think the manga handled things better from the little bit that I read, and the only reason why I say that is because I think this is one of those shows that translates better without any sort of animation. I think the harshness of some of the images in the manga do the series a lot better than transposing it to an anime does, or adapting it to an anime does. Some of the things like voice acting are things that I don't really need to hear, or like there are I don't know. I guess the best way to just put it is this is a show that seems as if it would have been fine left as a manga and never adapted. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with the adaptation per se, as much as it just is, if I was going to watch or if I was going to, like, absorb this series somehow, I would just rather do it through the manga, because it doesn't necessarily benefit from having a decent amount of animation, the voice acting, a bunch of fucking still frames and, like, really flowery imagery and stuff like that, especially when the art of the manga is just better than the art of the show. And the core ideas, I feel get across better in silence than they do within the the noise of the show, if that makes sense, right? This is something that prevails in silence, not something that prevails with animation and being adapted. So if I had to give it a score, I'd probably go like 5.5. I watched 4 episodes, I'm pretty positive, and just went, okay, I just don't really care. I thought that, like I said, I thought the dynamic between the main 2 characters was kind of interesting. Nothing too impressive, but I figured that it also wouldn't go anywhere. And from the little that I've heard about it, I'm assuming that was right. So I don't miss the fact that I dropped it. 5.5. Steins Gate Zero pisses me off the most. Basically for most of the reasons Digibro also said. That's really virtually all I have to say about it. If you want to know my thoughts, you could basically go watch Digibro's video, because we have damn near the exact same thoughts. It's a pointless sequel. It's a pointless sequel that doesn't elaborate on... The one thing that I thought that the sequel would do is elaborate on the psyche of Okabe, right? And it doesn't, but it doesn't do it to a frustrating amount. And the reason why I say that is because if he's virtually the only thing pushing the show. Season 2 is just stagnant. Nothing happens. I say this getting through 17 episodes of season 2. It wasn't like I got to like episode 6, 7 and was like, oh, nothing happened. I went through over half of the series. Nothing ever happens. There's never any sort of big revelation. There's kind of build up towards Amadeus and Kirisu coming back into like the picture and the scene and whatever, but nothing really evolves of anything. It's stagnant. It goes nowhere. None of the characters are really elaborated on too much, and the ones that are elaborated on means that are very what's the word? Predictable, I guess. Like oh god, I can't even remember. Matsuri, I could be wrong on the fucking name. You all know what I'm talking about. Tutoru, right? For example, like the feeling of not being able to help, or the feeling of feeling helpless, and blah 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 blah. Like these sort of stereotypes that plague modern scripting today. What I realized was that when I watched Steins Gate back around, I got into it pretty late, so I think I watched it around 2014, 2013, right? When I watched it back then, those sort of, the amount of stereotypes that it encompasses and the amount of archetypes it encompasses now bother me. But back then they did not, and so my perception towards the series was very twisted, and I guess all this did was give me a lesser view of the characterization and things that went on in Steins Gate, as well as the fact that despite those stereotypes and archetypes being an issue with the original Steins Gate, they still kind of stand the test of time. But you know, I think Steins Gate Zero only helps me demean my thoughts on the series as a whole. I will say this though, Steins Gate Zero and the pretty shitty directing at most parts during the show helped me realize how well directed Steins Gate the original is. There's some really good storyboarding. It's really well shot, and it's really interestingly shot. Steins Gate Zero is really bland. It never really draws your attention towards the screen. It's not very good looking. There's nothing very intriguing about the way. I will say this: the sound direction in the original Steins Gate, there were some times where I remember one of my issues being like sound effects in the original Steins Gate, because you would have stuff like a blanket like being flapped or whatever, and it would sound like somebody stepping on a fucking newspaper, or it'd sound like like stuff like that. And it was just smaller sound effect issues. Steins Gate Zero sucks. Like really, really bad, and to the point where I'd probably give it a 3.5 if I could give it a rating, because it's like pretty fucking terrible. That's all I really got to say about it. Tokyo Ghoul is, for the first 3 episodes, I was at least entertained. At that point, I think I was giving it somewhere around a 4 to a 5. And the further it went on, I think I got through episode 6, I just dropped it, because at that point it was just incomprehensible shonen garbage. And that's, I don't feel like there's much else that I have to explain here. The primary cast of characters is more interesting than the original Tokyo Ghoul, if you ask me. But I do have a couple of problems with those characters. The first one being, like I said, I don't remember some of the fucking characters in this show. I think his name there's no way that's his fucking name. The black-haired guy, right? Black-haired guy that ends up getting infected with, or ends up getting the fucking RC cells, or whatever the hell they're called, injected into him, so he can try to, like, overthrow Kaneki or whatever. That guy pisses me off because the fact that they kind of, the director, it feels like, kind of assumes that you can't tell that he's doing something evil, and so every time he does something that is even slightly malevolent, he just screams to the fucking audience what he's doing. It's like, oh yeah, I'll walk him backstage. Ha! Joke's on you! I was never actually gonna walk him backstage, I was actually gonna walk him to the garage and rape him in his asshole. And it's just stuff like that, right? Where I don't need your explanation, I can kind of use context clues to figure out what the hell is going on. Aside from that, I wish they had got to, you know, Kaneki turning back into Kaneki a little quicker. The enemies are jokes. Like, not even just enemy designs, but like the fact that we had two enemies named like Gugu and Gagi, or Gugu and Gaga, and then there's just some random fucking guy that starts crying because Gugi and Gaga died in like episode 4 or 5 or some shit like that. I remember him having his breakdown and me breaking down, tears of like laughter, because it's just fucking absurd. It's just laughably bad. That's all. It seems as if we have a lot of shows this year that were just laughably bad, right? Or shows that were so bad that you had to question if they were actually intentionally bad. And that's also how I would describe Mahou Shoujo Site, which is the next show. Another show that at least was kind of interesting for the first half of its first episode, at least, not because of the content of the episode, but at least the way in which they were handling the main character, or handling the issues of like bullying and depression and things of that sort. It really did seem dark and grim and hopeless, and I did like the idea of like her constantly kind of being traumatized, and I was like, hey, maybe we can just get her being traumatized the whole show, or maybe that'll be enough to like keep me interested. But it's not. There's issues with, again, laughable enemies, laughable one-dimensional enemies, the show not looking very good. You're seeing a pattern here, right? Most of these shows that are down here are not down here solely because they don't look very good, but if you're in one of the drops, chances are you weren't even able to keep me interested on like a visual level, right? And the only show that even got somewhat close to that was Violet Evergarden, and it just is so fucking boring that I just fell asleep every time I tried to get through an episode. It was like watching Made in Abyss. Again, taking more shots at Made in Abyss. Back on the subject of Mahou Shoujo Site though, it's just bad. Character designs are pretty fucking ugly, if I'm being honest. The dynamic with the brother is laughably fucking terrible. Again, one-dimensional, evil, fucking beating rapist brother. That's it. It's what you like. Again, it's one of these shows you would just classify as, this is the definition of what a bad anime is. If I had to give it a score, it's probably a 2. Yeah, that's about it. We only got 2 shows left, and I'll knock out the second one before I will knock out the one I was about to talk about. We'll knock out Radiant real quick. Radiant I dropped because it just wasn't too interesting. It kind of felt like one of those early 2000 adventure shows, but without anything that was sort of intriguing. I kind of got Zammed vibes from it at first. I also got vibes of, oh god, I can't remember what the hell the name of that show was from a couple. Comet Lucifer? I think that might have been the name of it, right? It was something like, I think that might have been the name. The first episode of that, or Rolling Girls, things of that sort. I was getting vibes like that from the first episode, until the first episode finished and I realized this is just going to be a very generic shonen. There's nothing interesting here, and I kind of don't want to watch this. And that was about it. Wasn't anything necessarily terrible about it, just wasn't very interesting, and I could see that it was on its path to be a fucking like 4 to 5 out of 10, so I just dropped it. That's all. Last show, Goblin Slayer. Goblin Slayer's first episode, I was very disappointed because I heard everybody talking about a rape scene and thought it was going to be like berserk level of like rape, like, you know, during like the Golden Age arcs or whatever. But it was not. It was just some girl like kind of with her face slightly blacked out, looking dead on the ground, and you saw like her head moving up and down, and that's about it. I was very disappointed. If I'm being honest, that was the only reason I ever even like attempted to watch it. I only got through what? Not a little more than half of the first episode. I got through about 17 minutes before I just called it quits and went, this isn't interesting. And if I want dark fantasy, there's plenty of other things I could go fucking watch, and this is not one of them. And I can tell this is not going to be interesting because we're running into fucking like the show starts in an RPG bank with magicians looking for party members. So this is just going to capitalize on a bunch of video game tropes and is not going to be decent. It's probably a 3. So I dropped it on the first episode. I thought here are my thoughts on my actual thoughts on the rape scene. I don't mind the idea of rape in anime. Like, I don't see what the problem is. It's a storytelling medium. You tell what stories you want to tell. My issue is just that it wasn't necessarily impactful enough, if that makes sense. And I only say that because everybody was hyping it up, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna watch this because like it must be shockingly gory or shockingly fucked up, so it must be at least worth the watch, and it was not. And in terms of the show, though, I actually don't mind. I think the rape scene was actually good for the show, right? And I say this because it helps personify, or it helps really define what the goblins are in terms of like danger levels, how vicious and cruel and awful they are. But when you just have, I don't know, when they get eventually turned into cannon fodder by Goblin Slayer later with, at later points in the series and within the episode, they lose that feeling of dread. Like, they lose that intimidating factor. This is also something that I've heard from other people that have watched the show. People that have watched the show say that, like, as it goes along, that intimidating factor that the goblins once have, they don't. And if they had kept, I don't know, if there's, like, this feeling that they were going to get progressively more dangerous as the show went on, I think I could convince myself to keep watching it. But it just was not worth. It just didn't seem as if it was really going to go anywhere, or if, like, the goblins were going to be intriguing. And for a show called Goblin Slayer, I need the goblins to be kind of interesting. Like, the enemies need to be interesting. If the enemies are just going to be, I don't know, cannon fodder, then I don't see why I would keep watching. That's my primary thoughts on Goblin Slayer. The characters were very uninteresting. They're all really archetypical. And, yeah, 3.5. And that's all the shows I dropped. Like I said, not all of these shows are, like, terrible. Like, if I could look at a couple of shows like A Place Further Than a Universe and Tonkatsu Ramen and Ameyagari, those are shows that aren't terrible. There's nothing really necessarily wrong with them in terms of, like, content per se. Or there's nothing, like, horridly wrong with them in terms of content. It's just they're either not interesting or they fail to capitalize on something that could potentially have a lot of, like, that's kind of a tautology, obviously. I was about to say potentially have something that have a lot of potential. But they just don't capitalize on their potential, it seems like. Or there's something that they don't do within the first 2 to 3, or like 3 to 4 episodes that I expect them to do that's indicative of where the show is going to go. And so I dropped them before I just felt as if I was wasting my time. And that's my thoughts on the shows that I dropped. I probably could have kept this a little shorter, but I didn't go off the script. I just kind of am ranting at this point. Next video is going to be on the shows that I didn't finish due to time constraints. Most of those I think I'm going to be actually able to, like, breeze over. And then I'll get to the shows that I completed. I kind of feel like doing individual videos on those shows. But we'll see when we get there. So thanks for watching or listening, or if you're, like, not listening, thanks for being on planet Earth and giving me something to strive for. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just gonna leave. Bye-bye. Happy New Year's. 2018 sucked, and we'll hope that 2019 is a much better year for anime.